I'm very honored to be with you today, and despite what John just said, I do not in any way claim to be an expert in mapping, but I do feel like that I'm representing our Next Move team today, which does contain some experts in mapping, and I'll mention their names in just a second. I wanted to just make one comment that's probably implied or understood in what John was sharing about Next Move, but just thought it was worth actually articulating. John said Next Move exists to provide answers, almost as if there's this, box over here that has all of these answers in it that then we can just dispense, these answers out to mission practitioners or to missions agency leaders. I just wanted to articulate it that Next Move is those missions agency leaders and those mission practitioners. Those answers that we say that we're trying to discover are being discovered by our participants themselves. So really, John and I are primarily in a facilitation role as Brother Jura just mentioned, this idea of a facilitation role. We really feel like we're in this facilitation role to bring together a community of missions agency leaders who are motivated to seek out those answers that will help them at their missions agency level. So I just wanted to clarify that we are looking for answers and developing solutions, but it's the participants themselves, it's the teams themselves made up of those missions agency representatives who are really developing those, and then we're just sort of curating that process along with them. So let me speak for just a moment on mapping, hopefully some practical things that would be helpful. And again, I'm really more speaking on behalf of our Next Move mapping group. I'll just give you the names of some of the guys who have participated in that. Keelan Cook, Dr. Jim Haney, and Dr. Brian Galloway, both of the International Mission Board of the Southern Baptist Convention. Dr. Rick Maples from AIM has been one of our participants, and Lauren Millhouse, who was a part of Global Mapping International for quite a while, have all contributed to this. For the information that I'll be sharing with you today, I'm particularly indebted to Dr. Brian Galloway, whose name I mentioned, and then also a gentleman by the name of Frank Haregrove, who serves with Media Impact International. I communicated with both of them at length in preparation for talking to you today, and they shared with me some very, very helpful information. If you do, we'll mention this later too, if you do have specific questions, honestly, I feel like I would probably serve you better depending on what the questions are. If I could even record some questions and talk to you, and would be happy to feed those questions back to these anthropologists and mapping experts who work with us in Next Move, who could probably give you much more definitive and clearer answers and information than me. So if we get to that, we'll do that. So again, just a few practical steps, and I have control here, don't I? Let's see. So first of all, I want to just mention this as a first step to thinking about mapping the diaspora. You can't do everything, but you can do something. I think that's probably the first principle. Don't try to do everything. Do something in particular. That's basically what we're saying here. Define and limit your research to what will help accomplish your ministry's mission and purpose. And I have just a couple of examples there. I left the agency unidentified because that was something that I was requested to do, but a missions agency that had its foundations in North America, but has personnel all over the world. Actually, 2/3 of their membership are not Westerners. 2/3 of their membership are from all over the rest of the planet, from other places. But their foundations and their original home offices are in North America. A missions agency, they specifically wanted to do some diaspora research in the context of North America. So this example is their efforts to decide where to place workers and place teams throughout North America, which was new for them. Our mission sending organizations, I've talked to some brothers here, similar for South Korea. Missions means going somewhere else, right? You send workers to somewhere else, but to think about placing workers within your own land was an adjustment for them. So just as an example, they made the decision, we only will research diaspora people groups in North America where we already have workers placed in the homeland. So that way they could begin to build those relationship bridges naturally between diaspora peoples they might connect with in America to connect with potentially with the teams that they have already placed in the homeland. And then since they wanted to see at least the potential for the idea of movements to occur, you need just a certain number of people in an area for the idea of a movement to take place. So they made the decision that they would look for people groups with greater than 50,000 population in North America. And then further down than that, they had some cluster criteria. In any given city, there would be a certain amount of this people group clustered in a region or an area before they would consider the process of placing one of their teams there. So I'm not necessarily offering that illustration saying that's the way to do it. I just wanted to illustrate with a practical example. They knew what they were looking for. Before they even started the research process, they took the time to discern what do we actually want to identify. And that then shaped their whole work process from there. And then I used also Global Gates, an organization based in North America that you can see kind of by their very name. They have certain definitions of what defines a gateway city. One of these major thoroughfare types of centers of activity in North America. Could be mostly in Canada and the United States, where they have cities that they've identified where they've placed workers. So same thing. Global Gates has made a very definite decision not to do everything, not to go everywhere, but to go somewhere specifically. So that would just be the first recommendation is if you're thinking about a mapping effort for your mission sending efforts, define your criteria well so that you know what you're looking for right from the beginning, okay? And then we're going to look at two different things, public information and private information. This breakdown between those two, again, Dr. Brian Galloway was very helpful with this information. He made the point to say that you want to use public information as signposts. Just look at them almost as signposts, as markers. And I've got some examples there of some things. There's census data that can be accessed. No one of these is the whole story. And no single one of those can give you the entire picture. But taken collectively, you can start to form a picture. So census data, as John mentioned a little bit, looking for clubs and associations. I live in Gainesville, Florida. So we're in a university community. We have about 70,000 college students, and I think about 3,000 or 4,000 of those are international students, not counting the scholars and people working in our teaching hospital from many different nations and now in the area where I live. So I'll talk a little bit more about Facebook or social media in just a second and reframing that a little bit. But I just very casually went on Facebook and typed in, I may have even just done a Google search, Gujarati. Just decided on one and just typed in the word Gujarati and started searching. And within minutes had a state level Gujarati association for the whole state of Florida, and finding out where a couple of their key gatherings and celebrations were going to take place around some Hindu holidays in Florida. One was down in the south, one was out on what we call the Panhandle. And then I also found a local county level Gujarati association club. So again, it's not the whole story, but within minutes, you can find some starting points, some entry points to begin with, okay? Anthropological and sociological journals, being able to read articles there and study these things. One of the things that Dr. Galloway mentioned was sometimes when we come to a journal like this, we will only see the article itself as our resource. But he said anytime you have the article itself, you get the article and you also get the author as a resource. Don't overlook the fact that the authors themselves are a resource that can often be tapped if they're accessible. And you have all of the citations. That's a part of your resource kit for doing this, studying out the data that you may want to find out about a people in these anthropological and sociological journals. So he really emphasized that. Don't just see the article itself as your resource. See everything that comes with that article as potential resource as well. There are different types of monetized data. If you have the resources to be able to actually purchase data, that can be used if there's a specific project that you're trying to look for. And I'm going to mention the marketing firms and then come back to social media. Marketing firms, we can hire marketing firms for a number of different things, but given the right criteria, a similar approach with a marketing firm that would be favorable to the work that you're trying to do could be of help. Again, those are more paid services to be able to gather the information that you're hoping for. One that I didn't list here is faith-based organizations that are doing the bringing together of data and mapping. And we have some of those based in the United States and North America. I have 4 or 5 written down that we have shared about in our context in North America. The People's Next Door, Pray for Every Home, and I can give you the names of some of these if you think that they may be helpful to you, even if it's just to look at the model that they're trying to pursue. So I can show you those. One specifically I would mention in the North American context is peoplegroups.info is a resource that we have there, and that's from the International Mission Board. Beyond peoplegroups.info, they're also developing peoplegroups.eu for Europe, and they're also developing peoplegroups.as for Asia. So those are in development and maybe something that you want to note and remember. We mentioned social media here, and then I'm going to go on to the next slide where we talk about private information as well. We mentioned some social media there as well. In speaking with Frank Haregrove, the name that I mentioned before, he gave me some great input on the use of social media for mapping and data gathering. He said a lot of Christian organizations want to use social media to push out a message, push out information. And he said that's really not the best use of social media for the purposes that we're talking about here. He said use social media to identify people ready for spiritual change. Use social media to identify people ready for spiritual change. He gave me a couple of different illustrations, one I believe in Nepal and one in Turkey, where they had done these types of campaigns to sort of put some communications out, and through the process that they followed, they're able to identify specific people so that when people from their agency showed up, they had like 10 names of people that they had already identified that were ready. They were actually ready for spiritual conversation. And they used social media not so much to map, where are the clusters of these particular types of people? He said, so you can find that information in other places. But to really try to find specific people who really are ready for spiritual conversation. So identify people, not places. Place, he says, on social media has more to do with connections, not physical location. So to use social media to try to identify physical location, there are other tools to do that probably more effectively. But you can identify connections and readiness through some relationships that you can identify there. So if public information is your signposts, your marker points, then private information is sort of a verification process and a personalized process. Dr. Galloway said that many times people will gather this public level information, and then it starts getting cited and quoted, and sometimes it's wrong. It's inaccurate information, but it begins to be repeated, and then it's accepted as right, because this level was not done carefully enough to move beyond the signpost level of the public information and really go a layer deeper to verify that information with what we would call private information. This could be interviews. Just again, you see some of the list there, just some ideas thrown out. I thought Dr. Galloway's idea of museum docents and curators and librarians, it's very creative thinking to who in the community could you talk to that could provide insights in ways that we may not as obviously think about. So just putting some creative thinking into who would be the people that you could talk to verify and further personalize and deepen the information that you've been able to gather from the public resources. And then there's no replacement for being there in person. Site visits, spending time. Again, the interview process would obviously imply that, right? That there would be some personal contact with people. But I mentioned Keelan Cook earlier, one of the people who served on our mapping team. One of Keelan's big passions is the earlier and the more personal you get people themselves involved in this information discovery process, the higher the potential for their mobilization goes. So getting people involved in visiting in person, talking to people in person is a part of the process as well. And then we utilize, in Next Move, we learned this terminology that we use fairly regularly. We talk about our trusted brokers. At least in our context, I don't know if it's this way everywhere, but in our context, sometimes we want this perfect, wonderful database that if we can just go to this one place to get all of the information that we could want or need, that would serve all of our needs so that we would know exactly where to place missions workers. Where's this place where everybody's putting all of their information into? That's never going to happen. For multiple different reasons, that resource is not going to exist. But what if we're the databases? What if you're the database? And what if you're the database and you're the database? Meaning that as we develop relationships with one another and we cultivate trust that comes from that, then everything that you know and everyone that you know now becomes accessible to me as well. But it's not done casually. It's something that has to be built on trusting relationships with one another. So rather than just relying on the public information, that's a part of the picture. But then how do we cultivate the right kinds of relationships, not manipulatively, but genuinely cultivating these trusting relationships with one another so that we can accomplish the work together and understand more and know more together than we would be able to do on our own. And then we've already mentioned some things about social media. So I would say similarly there of using social media in a way that is appropriate and the most helpful. Now, John mentioned this jokingly already, but he is right that I tend to be, my passion is in 3 words, I think. Is okay a word, by the way? I don't know, does that count as a word? So maybe it's 4 words, I don't know. But I think a passion of mine is in 3 words. Okay, now what? I find that tends to be my role a lot in the kingdom and the different things that I participate in. I seem to be the person who comes along that says, this is great. Now what do we do? What is it that's going to matter? What's going to be the result of what we do? Many of us have been to all kinds of different wonderful discussions and gatherings where we have wonderful conversation, we're inspired, and then we need someone to be a part of that process, to take ownership, right? And to help make things actually happen. So that's why I wanted to have a slide like this, where if something in your missions organization, if something in your mission sending efforts would be supported or would be furthered by a mapping or a data gathering initiative, if that's something that would be helpful to you, then someone needs to be responsible for that, right? So build a team, form a group of 3 or 4 who would be committed and given the charge, given the authority, given what they need to be able to implement a mapping or data gathering initiative on behalf of your agency. And then point number 2 is make it known. Instead of just having this work group off doing their thing by themselves that no one really knows what they're doing, make sure that the value and the reasons for that effort are known among those that you're working with. Hey, we have a group that's discovering new data, discovering new information because we believe it's going to change the way we do what we do. It's going to change the direction of how our agency is serving. And this is important to see how that, and even as early as possible, make that data visible. What would it look like to begin showing some of the information that this mapping team is discovering so that people are inspired by the information? I serve with the organization formerly known as the U.S. Center for World Mission. Some of you perhaps are familiar with Dr. Ralph Winter and the origins of the U.S. Center for World Mission. I was talking to Dr. Yamamori. He was at the Lausanne conference in 1974 when Dr. Winter presented his paper. And John and I were talking about this recently. Other people were already talking about the ideas of unreached people groups. That was an idea that was being discussed. But there was something about Dr. Winter's presentation, and you could speak to this with much more authority than me because I wasn't there. But there was something about his presentation that galvanized. And I think one of those factors, at least, is the charts. Coming forward with and now we've discovered that in a lot of cases, they weren't even right in some of the matters that he published. But there's something about putting those charts up to show, to visualize this information. Dr. Jim Haney of the IMB, when he came into a meeting with their leadership and laid the information out on the table so that they could see the data, it changed the direction of their planning meeting after that. So that's why I wanted that. Make your information known. It will change things. It has the potential to change things. And then obviously, you have to just do the work, right? Get the team together, keep them on track, get them started, get them moving, and help as any way that you can. And then again, the obvious conclusion or outcome of that would be to report and then utilize the findings for decision making. How would your team's work be reported? How is it? And in the idea of how would the data be reported, there's automatically an accountability in that, isn't there? That, okay, if there's a structure in place that this information is going to be reported, then that means the information has to be being gathered and prepared in order to be reported. So there's kind of some intrinsic motivation to see the work completed. And then follow through with decisions that might need to be made. This sounds really point by point bullet, but this is very complex and a long process. This isn't something that's done simply, but hopefully some of this at least provides some practical steps as a starting point for how mapping might serve your mission sending efforts. Thank you.